The Jurassic Park franchise is a series of films that uses dinosaurs to dissect the ethics of genetic engineering. It also happens to be one of the highest-grossing film franchises of all time. The most recent installment, Jurassic World, was the first movie to make over $500 million during its opening weekend.
We're gonna make a fortune with this place.
So although there are countless science fiction films that deal with issues of genetic engineering, it seems safe to say that Jurassic World is one of the most influential today. Not everyone exposed to the depictions of genetic engineering in this film and its predecessors will take the time to fact-check them before, say, voting on new policies or legislations. So it's important to look closely at what this movie is saying and how accurately it represents genetic engineering in the real world. Jurassic World takes place in an alternate reality in which humans are capable of cloning dinosaurs. The original Jurassic Park goes through this process in detail, and part of what makes it so resonant is that a lot of it is surprisingly plausible. The dinosaurs are cloned using DNA extracted from dinosaur blood in the stomachs of prehistoric amber-encased mosquitoes. This DNA is fragmented, and geneticists fill in the gaps in the genome with the DNA of West African frogs. Then, they insert the DNA into unfertilized ostrich eggs, from which the dinosaurs eventually hatch. By the time Jurassic World takes place, it looks like the basic process hasn't changed much. This method of dinosaur cloning is probably never going to happen. DNA decays quickly in the presence of water, ultraviolet light, and heat. Although amber dehydrates the tissues inside, the fossilization process exposes it to tremendous heat and pressure. A recent study on preserved mitochondrial DNA from moa bones put the half-life of DNA at about 521 years, meaning every bond in the molecule will be destroyed after 6.8 million years at most. Considering the last dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, the chances of finding preserved, useful dinosaur DNA are next to zero. Moving genes from one organism to another, such as from a frog to a dinosaur, is a real process called transgenesis. One modern transgenic organism is Bt corn, which contains a gene from a soil bacterium that makes it toxic to certain insects, offering an alternative to pesticides. Transgenic organisms can be created cheaply and easily today using the CRISPR-Cas9 system, which consists of a strand of guide RNA attached to a nuclease that can cut DNA at a location that matches the guide RNA. Transgenes can then be inserted at this location. The fact that frog DNA was chosen to fill the gaps in the DNA sequence seems to play on the outdated idea that most DNA is junk DNA that doesn't do anything, in which case you could insert filler DNA almost indiscriminately. While most DNA is non-coding, meaning it does not code for specific proteins, we now know that some of this regulates the expression of coding DNA. The use of unfertilized ostrich eggs in the cloning process is similar to somatic cell nuclear transfer, a real process which was used to successfully clone Dolly the sheep in 1996. In this process, a nucleus containing a full genome is transferred into a donor egg cell with the nucleus removed. An electric stimulus is applied to induce cell division, and the zygote is left to develop in a surrogate mother or artificial womb. Jurassic World takes this process further with the introduction of Indominus rex, a transgenic Tyrannosaurus rex with DNA from velociraptors, cuttlefish, tree frogs, pit vipers, and other organisms, ostensibly to make it more exciting.
They're dinosaurs, wow enough.
Claire refers to it as
our first genetically modified hybrid,
which is completely inaccurate. Hybridization specifically refers to the result of interbreeding, which this dinosaur is not.
Oh, Indominus wasn't bred.
And genetically modified is far too broad. This dinosaur is specifically transgenic, as is every other dinosaur in Jurassic World. However, by singling out Indominus rex as the first genetically modified hybrid, the film employs the language of the debate over genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, and becomes complicit in some of the misconceptions associated with that debate. For one, that genetic modification is new, when it's actually something humans have been doing with artificial selection since the rise of agriculture 12,000 years ago. This film also pushes the idea that transgenic organisms are inherently dangerous. After all, it's essentially a monster movie about a deadly transgenic organism, which is interesting because while Jurassic Park openly refuted its identity as a monster movie,
don't the monsters come over here?
Not monsters, Lex, they're just animals.
Jurassic World only half refutes it.
I never asked for a monster!
Monster is a relative term. To a canary, a cat is a monster. We're just used to being a cat.
So to a human, Indominus rex is a monster, and it is treated as such. The film portrays it as terrifying right from the beginning.
Think it'll scare the kids?
The kids? This'll give the parents nightmares.
There's also this strange shot from inside its mouth, which borrows from movies like The Terminator and Predator, both of which place the camera within the villain's mask or facade to increase the sense of helplessness of its victims. We even see this field of apatosauruses that Indominus rex slaughtered for fun, and watch one die in the embrace of our protagonists. There is a half-baked, Blackfish-inspired explanation of this viciousness as a consequence of its isolation.
Animals raised in isolation aren't always the most functional.
But as far as we know, the T-Rex was also raised in isolated captivity, and it is portrayed here as almost friendly. Regardless, even with its tragic backstory, Indominus Rex is hardly portrayed sympathetically.
You have an M134 in your armory, put it on a chopper, and smoke this thing!
Treating Indominus Rex as a monster as opposed to an animal makes it easier to root for its destruction. The conflation of monstrosity with transgenesis has the potential to leave audiences walking out of the theater fearful of transgenic food. In reality, there is no evidence of transgenic foods inherently posing a threat to human health. Transgenesis is simply one possible method of modifying an organism's genome, just like artificial selection. In addition, the film's oversimplified model of genetics, in which velociraptor DNA allows the creature to communicate and socialize with velociraptors,
That thing's part raptor.
can easily feed into an essentialist view of DNA. In an article about public opposition to GMOs in Scientific American, Stefan Blanc states that psychological essentialism makes us think of DNA as an organism's essence, an unobservable and immutable core that causes the organism's behavior and development and determines its identity. As such, when a gene is transferred between two distantly related species, people are likely to believe that this process will cause characteristics typical of the source organism to emerge in the recipient. This essentialism gives people the misconception that a tomato with, for example, a fish gene to increase its cold resistance would taste fishy, which is not true. Yet it remains another factor that plays into public anxiety about transgenic food, leading to scare tactic terms such as frankenfood. Putting this aside, Jurassic World does occasionally distance itself from genetic engineering scare tactics, instead criticizing the intersection of genetic engineering and corporate interests, an issue that was briefly explored in the Lost World Jurassic Park.
An extinct animal that's brought back to life has no rights. It exists because we made it. We patented it. We own it.
This transgenic organism is sponsored by a major company.
Verizon Wireless presents the Indominus Rex.
It was commissioned to be a hot new money-making attraction,
We want to be thrilled.
and it is strongly implied that Dr. Wu received a large sum of money to secretly design it as a bioweapon.
What? Our deal is still intact! Don't worry, you'll be well taken care of. Let's go!
Its genome is kept secret, ostensibly to protect InGen's intellectual property, so the characters are caught off guard by its traits.
It hid from thermal technology.
Really?
How is that possible?
Protection of intellectual property is a major issue with modern transgenic seeds. Most GM companies patent their seeds and require buyers to sign contracts in which they agree not to replicate or replant them. These companies also have a history of restricting independent research on their seeds or requiring researchers to pay licensing fees, limiting the progress of the scientific community. Finally, there is a legal gray area in which patented GM seeds that contaminate the fields of farmers who have not purchased them could put them at risk of a lawsuit. You might think of this as a farmer's fields turning against them based on contact with a genetically engineered organism, which is exactly what happens when Owen's raptors make contact with Indominus Rex. If this reading of Jurassic World seems confusing and full of contradictions, that's because the film itself is confusing and full of contradictions. It spent 10 years in development hell undergoing rewrite after rewrite, and the result is a chimera of a storyline that attempts to weave together cautionary tales about transgenesis, GMO patenting, bioweapons, and animal abuse, all held together with a single monster that half fulfills each role. But the movie is undeniably popular, and if it makes you excited about the possibilities of genetic engineering, it should. It's an extremely fast-moving field, and new genetic engineering technologies, trends, and policies are appearing every day.
How can we possibly have the slightest idea of what to expect?